Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the second of our cyber seminar series. I'm the moderator of our discussion, and my name is Elizabeth Nolan. I run Consult UCD, which is the university's managed consultancy service. Through Consult UCD, organisations external to UCD can access our academic expertise to apply world-class thought leadership to their own challenges and opportunities via a consultancy arrangement. Today's event builds on the Cyber Colloquium organised by the UCD Institute of Discovery and follows on from our panel discussion in January. Today, our panel of UCD and business experts will discuss how cyber threat intelligence can help optimise incident response processes so enterprises can respond faster and reduce attacker opportunity. We are delighted to be joined by Owen O'Connor, who is Director Information Security at Salesforce, and Neil McGrath, who is Senior Director at DocuSign Security Operations. These industry experts are complemented by two of our brightest lights in the cyber field, and we are delighted to have Liliana Pasquale and Pavel Gladyshev from the School of Computer Science with us today. So I'm going to get started by asking all of the panelists to give us a quick introduction to themselves and their interest in the topic at hand today. Neil, I might start with you, please.
Hi folks, thanks Elizabeth, thanks for the introduction. As Elizabeth said there, I'm currently working as a Senior Director in Global Security Operations in an organisation called DocuSign. And I am responsible for a number of teams, and they'd be the CSIRT teams, threat intelligence teams, tooling, the security orchestration and automation, DLP teams, e-discovery teams, and I've recently acquired physical security. Even though in light of COVID, you know, we're all working from home, we still have the physical presence and the monitoring of those offices and indeed data centers. I did previously work in a company called Workday as a security operations center manager, and we built up a global operation right spanning various domains across Europe, America and Asia Pac. Previous to that, I worked in Amazon as incident response and digital forensics lead. And previous to that, I worked in Bank of Ireland at a range of roles there in IT security, digital forensics and coding. And previous to that, I also worked as a software developer in a company called ICL. But I primarily, my first degree was in mechanical engineering from University of Limerick. And once I graduated, then I went to Japan, and I worked in a company called Yamagata and Sony Media, and also worked in an architectural company as a mechanical engineer. But while I was in Bank of Ireland working there for a number of years, I completed my PhD on a part-time basis, and my mentor and my supervisor was Dr. Pavel there, my fellow panelist. And let alone was it a great educational experience, it was truly enjoyable. So thank you, Pavel, for that. And so yes, I'm currently working in DocuSign as the Senior Global Security Operations. And the main teams would be CSIRT teams involved with proactively monitoring our domains across production-facing domains and environments, development, and indeed the corporate environment. And that the CSIRT team then would be supported by threat engineering that would be responsible for the detection writing, you know, and threat intelligence, and of course malware reverse engineering, and also attribution, threat attribution. And the e-discovery team then, of course, then its contribution would be through digital forensics in supporting the threat intelligence process and indeed the CSIRT process. You know, so that's me, and thanks very much. Great. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thanks, Neil. Very varied and international experience there. That's great. Liliana, will you introduce yourself today, please?
Hi, as you know, I'm Liliana Pasquale. I'm a lecturer or assistant professor at the School of Computer Science in UCD. And I'm also part, as you can see from my background, of the LIRO Research Center, which is an SFI-funded research center that covers different university institutions in Ireland, and also is partially funded by companies. My background is in software engineering. I received my PhD from Politecnico di Milano in 2011. And after my PhD, I started being more and more interested in the security domain. I'm currently part of a network pilot funded by the European Union, which is called CyberSec for Europe, which put together different researchers and companies who are working in security in Europe, and is meant to build some model for running a security research center in Europe. And I'm also working on an SFI project called for COPS, which is aimed to make system what's called forensic ready. So the idea of this project is that we aim to build software and cyber physical system in a way that they are prepared to collect data that could potentially serve as an evidence for future digital investigations. And this is a very difficult problem because nowadays when software systems are built, logging is generally very poor. It's very hard for developers to identify where logging instructions should be placed, also because software systems are very big, and also developers don't have security knowledge or background about where logging should be performed and how logging should be preserved. So I believe this is a very important problem. And also the reason why I decided to work on security is that security brings new challenges to software engineering, especially because of the presence of the human side. Developers who may not have the expertise. There are a lot of studies recently about the fact that developers don't have the security expertise to implement secure code, but also the threats brought by the users who are using the systems and can bring vulnerabilities. So this is all bringing new challenges to the way we build the software that are going to be used by and developed by people.
Okay, great. Thank you, Liliana. And we'll come back to lots of things that you've just touched on there later on in the discussion. So thank you for that. Owen, can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Thanks very much for having me. I suppose to start with, I'm a security person through and through. Been doing this now 20 years or so very little chance of recovery or a cure at this point. I would have started out in very technical roles, doing hands-on security work, a lot of it around incident response and forensics, a lot of sort of large-scale investigation work, large e-discovery projects, big government investigations, that kind of thing. Nowadays, I'm more in a leadership role in security. So I'm part of the organization within Salesforce, what we call the Salesforce Security Response Center. We help to detect and respond to threats against Salesforce. Similar enough organization to Neil's. So I suppose as one of the largest cloud companies around, and particularly enterprise cloud, security is a huge investment area for us. It's been growing quite a lot. So I've been 5 years now in Salesforce, and I've really spent a lot of that time building new teams, hiring people into the organization, helping to mature some of our processes and kind of make the environment a harder place to be a bad guy, ultimately. I've had an involvement with UCD as well for a number of years. So way back in late 2000s, 2007, 2008, I was part of the team with Pavel and others that helped to build the Center for Cybercrime Investigation. We did some very interesting work at the time, some interesting project work and some training work with Interpol, for instance, helping to train law enforcement on cybercrime issues and sort of the law enforcement angle on security. Pavel and I also did some early work on cybercrime occurrence in Ireland and sort of the experience of cybercrime. Back in 2006 and 2008, we did a survey there on cybercrime occurrence in Ireland. So been in and out of UCD over the years a little bit. Outside of my day job in Salesforce, I spend a lot of time on talent issues and talent challenges around security. Mm-hmm. So this summer I'm running what we're calling sort of a bootcamp project, helping folks who couldn't get an internship in security this summer because of COVID. And I see a few of the volunteers in the audience who are helping with that. We're kicking off next week with 30 plus participants, 30 plus volunteers. So that's what's taking up my time at the moment.
Brilliant. Good for you. Well, the best of luck with that. Hope it all works out well. And finally, Pavel, will you introduce yourself today, please?
Oh, thank you, Elizabeth, for this opportunity to be part of the discussion today. So my name is Pavel Gladyshev. I'm originally from Russia, and I did my final year of my degree in Trinity College here. It was about breaking RC5 codes using Java, which was fairly new at the time. And when I started my PhD, everybody thought that I was working in information security because my project was on breaking codes. Now, it was actually about parallel processing, but by chance, it happened that I started working in information security, and it was absolutely amazing and absolutely fantastic. So right now I'm associate professor in the School of Computer Science at UCD, and I love my job because it's one of the few jobs in existence which requires us academics to do interesting work, interesting research without worrying about the company's bottom line. So for that, I'm immensely grateful to University College Dublin, and I'm also immensely grateful to everyone with whom I got to work over the past 20 years. At different stages, we worked with Owen, with Liliana, with Neil, and many other attendees in today's panel. So thank you all very much.
Owen, I'm going to come to you first. Not being a cyber professional myself, but I would imagine the more you know about an incident and the faster you react, the better. But for security professionals then working in incident response, what's the biggest challenges they face today? Like, what makes it hard to react fast?
Good question. Yeah, it's a fascinating role, right? It's a great area of security. It's the path into security for a lot of folks. Great learning opportunities, great experiences, but it is tough going at times. I think the biggest challenge is we don't choose where we're going to be working next, right? And we can't even predict it. So we face a huge variety of systems, of applications, of networks, particularly in larger organizations where 1 week you might be working on an internal issue involving maybe finance systems. The next week you're working with a customer on their problem. And from there you go to maybe a network issue in a different part of the company entirely. So you're almost pinballing around off of different parts of the company, different technologies, different challenges. And we have a real problem, I think, maintaining people's skills and knowledge around that. So we have sort of a human factors problem, really. We need our people to be absolutely expert in every part of the organization, every technology we use, every technology they could possibly come across. And it's just not realistic anymore. We've passed the point where we can kind of pre-educate, pre-train everybody from that. And I think what we're moving towards is a blend of pre-training, sort of guess-based learning, where we try to say, well, we have a lot of Mac systems, so we'll do some Mac training. That's where we're guessing what you'll need, but then we need to blend that with sort of point of need reactive kind of training, where we say, you know, for the first time ever, you've come across this type of database that you have no information about. Here are the first 3 things you need to learn. Here's a way you can learn the very basics, right? Learn enough not to be dangerous in the first hour of an incident, rather than spending a week doing a training course while the incident is running, while everything is burning down.
Okay.
So I think there's some fascinating sort of human challenges around that.
Yeah, certainly are. Yeah, in terms of, you know, how you recruit people with those kind of skills to be able to diversify so quickly, and as you say, be confident and not cause damage. It's an interesting challenge. Neil, in your view, how important are these human factors from what you've seen?
They're very predominant. They're critical. When you look at an incident, right, and the one dynamic, and there are many dynamics at play. One in particular is the clock, right? And the clock is ticking. Now, what's at stake is another thing as well, is another dynamic. You know, what kind of level of data could be exposed, or could be stolen, or could be used against you. They're supplementary dynamics, but primarily it's time. And you put anybody, right? Even Owen was alluding to there, and just to extend Owen's piece about the human and the skill level, but you put anybody, be it a trained individual, and you put them against the duress of the clock, you know, strange things happen, you know, strange things happen. And there's also a need for support here in that environment when there's duress to react, right? Because the clock is ticking, there's duress to react. And then if you add into the mixture that the individuals that are under duress to react mightn't have the necessary skill set, well, then things can go sideways very, very quickly, right? Now, if that's an environment really in an incident response where kind of threat intelligence isn't at play, if you ask me, right? In my opinion. However, when threat intelligence is at play, you know, and it's at play in a right and a configured manner, it gives a lot of context to a situation, and it gives a lot of relevance to a situation, in particular in these situations of high kind of duress for the individual, because it can give added information to an alert that an individual receives in a security operations center. Oh, this alert is coming from this server. It has this type of data, and maybe some external IP addresses from a different country are probing this IP address, and this is the particular attacker's modus operandi. So it gives a lot of context to the individual, and then it might give added even more context to, well, this particular group are targeting this particular server because maybe they want to harvest credentials, you know, passwords that they can use downstream, you know. And it gives a lot of context, it gives a lot of relevance to the investigation at hand, but it also might give particular information of how they're getting into this particular IP address, or how they're getting into this host or this server through a particular vulnerability. You know, so now it gives another dimension of how the individual or the organization can remediate that particular attack scenario, because it gives indication of what vulnerability. The vulnerability meaning that there might be a weakness or a perceived weakness in a protocol of exchange of data, like SMB, you know, server message block, which was used predominantly in ransomware attacks. You know, and there's that kind of handshake between client and server, and that was exploited, and through malicious code and malicious payloads, etc. But it gives that particular context, and then, you know, it gives, you know, if you've got multiple servers that potentially could, you know, on a cloud scale, Owen was talking about kind of cloud environments. If you've got cloud scale type of environments where you've not just 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 critical servers, but you might have 3,000 critical servers, right? So you have a multitude of alerts coming into a security operations center. Having automation to a degree that ingests and makes sense of this threat intelligence really, really helps the individual. It doesn't remove the individual from the duress. But it certainly reduces in the alert fatigue, because now the individual or the team of individuals, and that team of individuals could be on a global basis, you know, the heavy lifting is somewhat reduced, you know, the sifting through and trying to find that signal in the whole kind of deluge of noise that threat intelligence does give direction. And then, you know, another very important aspect that kind of leads to the duress is that kind of alert load, the amount of alerts that an individual has to deal with on a daily basis. You know, that can lead to kind of burnout, to staff burnout, and that's a very important thing. And you're trying to introduce the automation and the intelligence, the threat intelligence, to reduce that load and also give kind of focus to your investigations and ultimately to your response, because the clock is ticking, you know. And Pavel, in his introduction, you know, the company's bottom line, he said the bottom line, you know, if data is leaked from any organization, in particular if it's critical data, this can have drastic consequences. And even if the data that is leaked is of minimal value, the fact that it gets out there and the stock exchange or whatever governing or governing dynamics are at play, and they interpret that, oh, such and such an organization's defense mechanisms are breached. It mightn't be, you know, it could be blown out of perspective here. And journalism being journalism, you know, and everyone does a great job. They get the wrong story, you know, and the wrong, it's kind of put out of scale then and misinterpreted. That can be very damaging too for an organization. So it's all, so the clock is ticking and it's all on the individual's shoulders, you know, and we've got great guys and girls trying to kind of make sense of these threats and alerts to kind of ameliorate the situation.
Very good. Very stressful working conditions. Oh yeah. Sorry,
What
go on,
I
Lily. Yeah.
was saying is that so one of the reason, like there are different problems associated with alert fatigue. It's not just the amount of information that is produced by, for example, intrusion detection system. And this is mainly due to the fact that they use some formal rules, so static techniques, most of the times to detect threats. And this leads to a lot of false positives. And
Yes.
so beside the amount of information, there is the risk of producing, you know, warnings that do not correspond to a real attack. And but at the same time, there are types of attacks that are so-called stealthy, that they try to camouflage in the normal behavior of a system, and so it's very hard to detect those type of attacks. So that there is a double-edged sword. And also, I wanted to link with the shortage in the education. There are a lot of studies. One was from CloudPassage in 2016. Saying that there will be 3.5 million unfilled cybersecurity positions by 2021. And the reason for that is that in most cases, universities don't have security modules as mandatory module in their undergraduate studies. So this is considered one of the major reasons for that.
That's interesting. Yeah. So Liliana, when we talk a bit there about like human factors and automating like as much as you can to help with alerts, but then potentially that could lead to alert fatigue, is it possible to fully automate something and remove the human factors? Is that, in your experience, is that a good idea, or will you always need a mixture?
Well, it's unfortunately, we are not there yet.
Okay.
For example, as I was mentioning, like intrusion detection system, but also vulnerability, system that do vulnerability scannings. They are mainly rely on regular expression or rule-based or pattern-based. And so this can lead to false positives. So basically they come up with the identification of an incident or a vulnerability, but that's not true. As well as the fact that you have a static rules means that you can miss out other cases that you didn't think about. There was a paper by a researcher from MIT that showcased that it was published, I think, in 2016, and showcased that continuous human involvement in providing input to a machine learning system that, for example, detect incidents or vulnerability can greatly increase the amount of the risk of having false negatives. So the risk of not detecting incident or vulnerabilities. So having humans that provide feedback is absolutely important. And also there are also legal implications, because there could be bias. There could be, imagine that you suspect someone to commit a crime, but your suspicion is not sufficiently justified, or it's not real. So this system can also be biased because they are based on static rules. Okay. So this is a very critical topic. Okay. And so I think human is not possible, although automation can help.
Owen, were you trying to come in there?
Yeah, it's a very good point. I think one place where you see this very clearly today is in discussions around automatic reaction to alerts. So if you talk to an engineer who's writing detection signatures, they will tell you they're very, very confident in their detection, right? That it's got a very high chance of detecting the badness. It's got a very low chance of detecting normal activity. And then you might ask them, well, why don't we just respond automatically? Why don't we, every single time you detect something, we will shut down that server, or we will isolate it from the network, or we will change the configuration in some way. And then they start to back off, right? Then it's like asking a security person about internet voting. They just don't want to touch it. They want to back away and say, well, I mean, false positives are very unlikely, but maybe we're not ready for automation of response yet.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay. And just building on something you said earlier, Owen, Pavel, I might just ask you, Owen said, you know, for some professionals in this area, you can't predict where you're going to be working next. But often organizations look to academics and areas of research to kind of try and consider what's next, what's the next frontier. Would you give us a little bit of an overview of the types of areas you're currently researching or working in?
Most certainly. Well, first, I actually wanted to comment to the previous comment by Owen and by Liliana. It's totally unplanned, but my point is that literally last week, I reviewed a very interesting academic paper for a journal. I'm not sure I can tell much about this paper at all, but I do hope that it gets published because it's a really good paper. It's submitted to Forensic Science International Digital Investigation Journal. I suppose I can tell just the idea. And the idea is that as most technologists nowadays, they use machine learning, but they use it in the opposite way. Instead of learning what constitutes an attack, they learn what constitutes normal activity. Mm-hmm. And then once you remove normal activity from everything else, what you're left with is worthy of attention of the analyst. And according to this approach, they get really good results on with a really low false negative rate. Again, I've probably already said too much, but I do welcome you to follow digital investigation journals. Some really interesting publications are going to appear there fairly soon. The comment, I suppose, second comment is that rule-based intrusion detection systems tend to work. They are conservative, and whatever they detect tends to be a problem. They're not as good at detecting novel stuff. And machine learning is being, there are attempts to use machine learning for everything that it can do, and in many cases for things it cannot possibly do. I suppose what captures my attention right now as a researcher is that we have this new form of technology, machine learning technology, which can do great things, but we don't really know how to investigate it. So I think understanding incidents involving AI-controlled systems and investigating systems controlled by AI systems is something that is a current scope for research that we do in Digital Forensics Investigation Research Group and elsewhere. So I wanted to start off with something that is not related to corporate environment whatsoever. It's investigation of automobiles driven by AI systems. There was a very famous incident in the United States back in 2018 where a AI-controlled self-driven autopilot car hit a pedestrian and the pedestrian died. It was investigated by the US National Transportation Safety Board, and here are a couple of slides from their official presentation. So the car was driving along the road. It has multiple safety systems. It has lasers, it has radar, it has cameras which automatically detect different kinds of objects. And there was a lady walking home from the bar, and she was walking the bicycle beside her. There was also a driver in this car who was supposed to hit the brakes if something would happen, but unfortunately, the driver wasn't paying attention. So that's the driver sitting and viewing TV program on her mobile phone. And then we observe person, she sees the person walking across the road, hits the brakes, but it's already too late. And it was very interesting. Oops. It was very interesting investigation. Okay. 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 My apologies. I need to get out of this. Okay. Okay, let me start this again. So, okay. Sorry, apologies, technology, Zoom and technology. So the problem in that incident was that although the artificial intelligence was able to see what being observed by the camera, AI was trained to distinguish between different types of objects on the road, including walking pedestrian or cyclists riding a bicycle. But in this case, it was poor visibility, and the person was not riding the bicycle. The person was actually walking the bicycle across the road. It was one of the difficulties, but basically it resulted in a situation when the artificial intelligence could not reliably identify the object on the road. And it was alternating between different possibilities without being able to change its mind until it was too late. And at that point, despite presence of multiple security systems, it hit the pedestrian and the pedestrian died. And
you're kind of agreeing with Liliana there, Pavel, really, are you, in terms of saying automation to a certain point is great, but you still need the human factor as well. You can't fully automate anything, really.
Well, interesting thing is that here we had human factor. We had a female driver sitting behind the wheel, but she wasn't paying attention because the car was driving itself.
Yeah, fair enough, yeah.
A form of operator fatigue, if you like.
Yeah.
Now, this was a test car, so it had a lot of login, which Liliana said definitely helps the investigations. But if we were talking about industry, about mass-produced car, the amount of login would probably be reduced. Okay. And in such circumstances, it would make investigations of such incidents much harder. Now, obviously, car crashes do happen, but not in the corporate environment. What I invite you to think about is how AI technologies can be applied within corporate networks and how this incident might affect us as users of corporate networks. Here are a few examples. AI is routinely used for approval of small loans. Now, it's easy enough to imagine that someone could subvert this AI system and apply for a loan and get approved. And if they put this process on a mass scale, send 10,000 small loan applications and get them all approved, it's obviously a problem. Intrusion detection systems can be great help to log analysis, but then if the intruder finds a way how to avoid how exactly AI-based system detects, what are the detection rules, this can be subverted as well, and the attacks can be targeted to avoid these rules. If there is a biometric access control system that looks at your face, there are ways to avoid it as well if you know exactly how it works. And then in automated quality control systems, for example, 20 years ago, there were systems that took pictures of cakes to make sure that they were of appropriate quality. I mean, if somebody rigs this system and starts producing badly formed cakes, it's not a problem. But if it starts producing badly formed medicines or some other form of industrial production, it could be a difficulty. Now, so we are currently working with IBM, or rather starting to work with IBM on research about investigation of attacks on AI-based systems. And there are fundamentally two ways to attack AI-based systems, two main ways. One is we can try to interfere with the input data. If we know how system detects certain events, we can manipulate input data so that it misdetects that as something else. And then second way of attacking AI-based systems is to insert malicious samples at the training stage. So just by way of illustrating. Modification of input data usually involves, usually relates to vision systems, such as biometric systems, where if you know the model learned by the AI, then very often you can combine your original image, which is in this case classified as panda, with a bit of modified mask, which looks a lot like random noise, and the resultant image looks a lot like the original image, but that specific system for which it's designed would misclassify it as something else entirely. So in this case, an image of panda is being misclassified as gibbon. But for this approach to work, the intruder would have to learn, would have to have access to the AI system and being able to reverse engineer it and analyze it. The other approach involves addition of malicious samples during training. So most of the time, AI machine learning systems is a form of programming by examples. So we give them lots of examples which show how we should understand a particular image. So in this case, stop sign would be detected as a stop sign. And the researchers in this paper, BadNets Identifying Vulnerabilities in the Machine Learning Model Supply Chain, have demonstrated that we can, if we have access to the training data, we can teach the system to identify a sticker attached to a stop sign as something else entirely. And the challenge from investigative perspective is that this happens early in the design stage. And with typical training examples being in millions, it's easy enough to insert thousands of bad examples, which are hardly detectable or maybe difficult to detect in the overall corpus of training data. And in that case, if we have a picture with a sticker, it would misclassify stop sign as a speed signal, and instead of stopping, the car would speed up and possibly kill the pedestrian crossing the road at that particular time.
And Owen, you might respond to this one. In a post-COVID world, like the corporate landscape is likely to change. You know, we're likely to see mergers and acquisitions, companies taking advantage of another company's distress during this time. And are those periods of weakness where some of the things that Pavel was talking about there, where they're more likely to happen, where you've got, you know, for a security professional overnight, their landscape like increases dramatically. Are there points of weakness there where threats like what Pavel is talking about there, where they can happen a bit more easily? And what would you advise a security professional if they were working in that kind of changing corporate landscape? What would their priorities be?
Yeah, it's definitely always an interesting time. I think both COVID and sort of mergers or even divestitures where companies are selling off maybe part of their business, a good incident response team kind of rolls with that pretty easily. I know in the case of our team, when we all pulled out of the offices around the world back in March, there were at least a dozen people who could have come up with that plan, right? It was just sort of, it was just natural for us to sort of figure out a plan on the fly, right down to the details of how many monitors can people take home from the office. Anyone almost in the team could have done it. In terms of sort of that scenario of overnight changes in scope where a team takes on maybe a new business or a new location or whatever, there's definitely sort of a period of vulnerability there. I suppose having gone through it a bunch of times, where I would start usually is trying to figure out, you know, the scope, understanding what you've taken on, understanding at a high level, not just the technical details, but things like what teams exist, what are the people dependencies you have, even how do you reach them, right? One of the most useful first week things you can get your hands on is the org chart and the phone list. Not necessarily the systems list, right? If you've got a good map of the people, you can figure out the systems if something were to blow up in week one after, say, an acquisition.
Okay, interesting. Could I ask you, Neil, maybe from your point of view, in the market, say potentially, where are there opportunities and gaps, say for budding entrepreneurs who are looking to see what can't be solved internally? Where is there no product on the market to help, like a security team or a response team? Are you seeing any opportunities and gaps out there?
That's you know, that's the $100 million question, and I'll try to answer that, Elizabeth. But in terms of, and I think everybody has alluded to that this silver bullet here, right? And it's really specific to you and your organization as you as an individual, what's important to you, and being able to protect what's important to you. In the recent environment, like the COVID environment, you might see a lot more COVID-style phishing attacks, phishing email attacks coming at you, trying to sell you more medication, or impersonation type of attacks, saying that, you know, you're always going to see those types of attacks, but the style and the theme would be different. But I would say, if you were going to look to the future and to bring in academia and research and in hardcore industry, taking into account your acquisitions and mergers, you've really got to understand your weakest point there. That's even though it's very proactive to understand your weakest point. If you're acquiring organizations or new companies that might have a lower threshold in terms of security, or the awareness mightn't be as high as yours, you're still susceptible to that gap in security measures, if you like. Yeah. But I would focus my research and my budget, if I had this, this stream boat of cash and investment, I would focus on machine learning, and understanding, like Pavel alluded to, falling asleep at the wheel here, right? And focus on, in terms of being able to structure data, breaking the data, the whole ocean, the myriad, the global availability of data into categories and entities based on various properties, and structure that data. Being able to structure that data in this madness is really kind of, it's quite liberating, and it's quite, and it'll help and facilitate a lot of remediation with incidents that could happen, and even pushing that boat out further into translating that structure of text into multiple languages, for example, through something like natural language processing. And this then would help you be able to classify events and entities in a meaningful way, and being able to, like, when you talk about the statistical analysis, there's really kind of two levels here, right? There's the correlative analytics that machine learning can help, but also the predictive models. If we can get better at predicting and demystifying and decluttering these events and being able to forecast using highly precise predictive models, that to me would be hugely beneficial, because that would reduce your false positives in that kind of sea of alerts, if you like. And but also, you know, just coming back to the human element, you know, we will, and Liliana alluded to it, we'll never take away the human component, and we rely heavily on that kind of heuristic approach that the human can apply and use during investigations. They can draw on their tribal knowledge of certain ways and rules and investigations and ways and very simple techniques to help with that, especially if you're dealing with a global team of individual and of analysts. You need your investigations to be done in a consistent manner around the globe by your various teams of various ethnicities, if you like. So you need a kind of consistent input and you need a consistent output of your investigations. So honest to goodness run books and playbooks that give guidance to the individuals, the humans. It gives them a certain sense of safety as well, where they can apply their knowledge and their investigative techniques in ascertaining certain facts and resolving incidents. So there's a conglomeration of honest to goodness, plain common sense, which are run books, you know, but also there's that kind of the progressive research that maybe machine learning can help. But machine learning, in order for machine learning to be machine learning, you need all of this kind of training, you need this data training, and that costs money and security too, you know, because there's an effort involved and expended in trying to learn your systems and teach your systems how to behave accordingly.
Right.
So, I mean,
yeah, I'd agree strongly. I mean, I think we have so many challenges around this area. It's a very rich seam to be mined for sort of product ideas, research opportunities, that kind of thing. Really, every step of the process, every level, you could help reduce manual effort, or you could do sort of shoot for the stars and do full end-to-end automation. And I think we've actually seen some successes in Ireland already, right? This is an area that we would be doubling down on rather than starting from scratch. There's a company in Dublin, Tynes, Owen Hinchley and Tom Kinsella are doing security orchestration and response stuff around incident response. We've seen NetFort in Galway, who were at this for a long number of years, sold to Rapid7 a little while back. We've seen sort of very large fundraisings, even sales of companies in Ireland in this area. And I think there's a lot more to come there potentially.
Liliana, I might just ask you then, finally, from your own research perspective.
Actually, I have to be a bit provocative here.
Go on, yeah.
I respectfully disagree.
Great.
In a sense that I think that I understand the importance of machine learning, and this technology has definitely potential. But some of the problems that we faced, for example, with the COVID, were related to the fact that technology and systems were built assuming that users were placed in their workplace to use such system. For example, the NSA reported an increase in the number of cyber attacks, and merely these attacks were mainly phishing email attempts that were targeting people working from home. And also there was an increase of mitigation blocking of NASA system trying to access malicious sites because their employees were accessing these sites from home. So this tells you a lot enough of the fact that it's important to also identify the context where systems are going to be built. And another important factor is the transparency. So with the COVID, a lot of personal information about test results are going to be used. And there is really not much transparency about which type of disinformation is going to be used for what purpose. And so I understand that for safety reasons, people are more inclined to to share their data. But there is also an issue about what data is necessary. and that there is really necessary to think about transparency, especially for contact tracing app. Which data are really necessary and which are not, for what purpose, and also for how long. Because there is also the risk that these data are going to be kept and used even after the COVID-19 emergency is over. And so all these aspects, I think, need to be taken into account, beside the need to, automate, the need for automation. But there is also a need to think about these requirements from design time when these systems are built. And I felt like these aspects have been kind of neglected, and the emergency, the COVID-19, has kind of make these issues resurface. Thankfully, the technology that we are using, Zoom, has now made an improvement from security perspective, and they are also going to enable end-to-end encryption now. So that's great. At least from this aspect, we are using a secure technology. But I think these are issues that's important to raise, and in relation to the COVID.
No, you raise an interesting point, Liliana, and we don't have anyone from the UCD from the kind of the social sciences or the law point of view, but they've been very active, the academics from that side of the house, during this COVID-19. And yes, as you say, it's important that the contact tracing and all that, but when it moves into the contact tracking, you start worrying about, what data are we giving up and why, and what happens to it when this is all over. And as you say, in an ideal world, we'd be thinking about all of those things as we design the software, and we'd have the time to build it all in. But they're very important questions as we go forward.
I just was also want to add that these aspects are really critical, are becoming increasingly critical for companies. For example, we have been just approved a project with Huawei about security assurances. And so the purpose is to really demonstrate with semi-formal proofs, for example, using arguments and techniques that are mainly used for safety critical systems, to demonstrate that the systems are secure, transparent, reliable. So to demonstrate by design that these systems are built with these requirements in mind, and they satisfy these requirements. So I think this is definitely something of increasingly practical relevance.
I would just like to say thank you to our panelists for joining us today and for sharing both their experience and their expertise. We're sorry this wasn't held in person in our lovely Nova UCD facility, but hopefully the third seminar series might be back in Nova UCD. So please feel free to follow Consult UCD on LinkedIn. Make sure you're on our mailing list, because we do hope we'll have more of these cyber seminars in the future, showcasing other expertise across the university. If there's certain topics you'd like us to address, please feel free to get in touch as well. And finally, I'll just say a big thank you to our 4 panelists today for joining us. It's been informative and not too technical, so I was able to follow along, which is great. So thank you, Owen, thank you, Neil, Liliana and Pavel. It's been great. So thank you.